We're with JoAnne Berkenkamp of the Natural Resources Defense Council and expert on food waste. JoAnne, big picture, how much food is actually wasted?
In the United States, about 40% of our food supply is wasted every year. It's a very large number. So when you look at what we produce, you add in what we import, and you take out what we export, about 40% of that goes to waste. Every single year, it's enough, in fact, to feed about 164 million people.
Okay, and we're not just talking about the food waste. I mean, there's other resources that are wasted during the process. Could you talk about that a bit?
That's right. It's not just the food that we throw out when we let food go to waste. So in fact, there's a whole series of other things that are affected. Food takes a lot of resources to grow, to chill, to ship, to package, and to dispose of. So for instance, when you look at food, and the water that's used to produce our food, about 20% of the fresh water that's used in the United States every single year is used to grow food that we in fact don't eat. About 18 or 19% of fertilizer and cropland that's used are used to grow foods that in fact go uneaten. So it has a lot of environmental consequences. It's also a very significant generator of greenhouse gas emissions. So those emissions happen all the way from farm to fork, particularly as product is being shipped and chilled and processed and that kind of thing. So when you look at the greenhouse gas emissions associated with wasted food, it's the equivalent of about 37 million passenger vehicles. That's equivalent to about 1 in 7 cars in the United States. And if you look at food waste globally, if food waste was a country, it would be the 3rd largest generator of greenhouse gas emissions in the world after China and the United States. So it's a big climate change issue as well.
Okay, you even break down the water waste down into shower minutes for different types of food. Explain that concept for me.
Sure. So there's a lot of water that's used to produce any kind of food, whether it's to grow crops, whether it's to raise animals that need to be fed and watered, whether it occurs during processing, that sort of thing. So for instance, if you look at how much water is wasted, if you waste a beer, it's not very much. If you waste a beer, it's about maybe 4 minutes of the equivalent of running your shower. If you waste a bar of chocolate, it's much more water intensive to produce chocolate. So if you waste a chocolate bar, it's equivalent of about 90 minutes of letting your shower run. If you waste a pound of beef, because beef is quite water intensive, it's equivalent to letting your shower run for about 6 hours if you waste a pound of beef. So we really need to think about the consequences of the food that we waste, because different kinds of food have different kinds of impacts.
Okay, now the big question is, why is this all happening? I mean, the food that's wasted, I mean, how much is coming from dinner plates, restaurant plates, from the manufacturing or the growing process?
So food waste occurs all along the supply chain, but it's particularly concentrated in a few parts of our food system. So consumers at home represent an estimated 43% of the food that gets wasted in the United States. So that really is about us as individuals and as families managing the food that we bring home and we use. Another 40% of the waste that occurs among consumer-facing businesses like restaurants, grocery stores, and institutional environments like colleges and hospitals and universities and that sort of thing. The biggest of those is the restaurant sector. And so we need those businesses to really engage and figure out how to draw down their waste, because it is a significant part of the equation.
Okay, and what are in the grocery store aspect of this? Talk about the date labels and how confusing are date labels and what can be done about those.
So everyone has seen the date labels that appear on the bottom of your canned vegetables, that appear on your milk, that appear on other kinds of foods. So there are a couple of very common myths about date labels. One is that most people assume that they're federally regulated. In fact, other than infant formula, they are not federally regulated. So the manufacturers that produce those foods will choose how to set the labels and to determine what they mean. But as a consumer, you really wouldn't know how those dates are established. Secondly, people often assume that the labels are an indicator that after the date on the label, the food is no longer safe. And that is generally not the case. Typically, a manufacturer will choose a date that indicates, in fact, when the food is at its peak freshness. And yet we see many people looking at that date, they don't open it, they don't smell it, they'll just throw it straight in the trash without seeing if it's still good or not. And that leads to a lot of waste. People waste a lot of money because they don't understand correctly what the date labels mean. We estimate that date labels contribute to about 20% of the waste that occurs in consumers' homes. And then it's also a cost factor for retailers because they're managing their inventory based on those dates as well.
Okay, tell me about the Walmart study on the date labels.
Sure. So Walmart did this really fantastic study of their private label vendors, and they surveyed them to see what sorts of labels they used. They identified 47 different terms that are being used, like best buy and best of used by and enjoy buy. And what they really were very effective in documenting was that there's a proliferation of terms. People generally don't understand what they mean. They have difficulty interpreting them. And so that really has led Walmart to take a strong leadership position in having their vendors coalesce around very specific, consistent language. And we hope that that kind of an initiative will be picked up by the broader industry, also through legislation potentially, to really clarify what the date labels mean, to streamline them. And I think that'll be a real help to consumers.
Okay, that's all we need. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.